You will never play professionally, not in this hall, not in any hall. Sit down. Maestro Victor Holst said it in his flat, polished voice, the way another man might dismiss a waiter who had brought the wrong wine. He said it with one finger still pointing at the bench where Mira Vance had just been playing 3 weeks before the recital she had been preparing since she was 16. The studio was full. 11 other students, 2 assistants. The accompanist who had driven across town to read her concerto. Even the janitor in the doorway with a mop bucket, because Holst's voice carried into the corridor and he had stopped to listen. Mira did not sit down. She stood with her hands at her sides and waited for the rest. Holst was a man who never said one cruel thing if he could say 4. You play like a girl trying to apologize for being on the bench, he said. Every phrase asks permission. Permission from the composer, permission from the audience, permission from me. I do not give permission. I confirm what is already true. And what is true, Miss Vance, is that you are not made for this. You are an accomplished amateur. Go and be one somewhere where the standard is lower. He turned away from her before she could draw breath. He turned to the others. Anyone who has been silently agreeing with Miss Vance's choices for the last 3 weeks, please understand that I have just spoken about you also. Take 10 minutes. When you return, Lucas will play the Brahms. The studio emptied in a strange, brittle silence. Nobody met Mira's eyes. The accompanist gathered her scores carefully, the way you gather things out of a house after a fire. The janitor stepped back from the door. Mira walked out of the studio with her shoulders straight because her father had taught her that you do not give a man like Holst the satisfaction of seeing the shoulders bend in the hallway. She made it to the second-floor stairwell, to the landing where the radiator ticked, before her knees went. She sat down on the cold marble step and put her forehead on her arms. She was 19. She had practiced for this recital since she was 16. She had not, in those 3 years, been alone with the piano for more than 9 hours at a stretch. She had not slept past 5. She had not eaten a real meal without her metronome on the table beside it. She had played until her wrists wept and Holst had said only, "That is the price, Vance, that is the price." She had paid the price. The price had told her she would never play professionally. A hand touched her elbow. It was the janitor. He was a quiet middle-aged man named Mr. Adebayo, who had been at the conservatory since before she was born, who polished the floors of the practice corridor at 5 in the morning and had let her use the smallest practice room on Sundays when it was supposed to be locked. "You forgot your coat, Miss Vance," he said. He did not look at her face. He held the coat out folded. "I'll wait by the door if you want. The taxis here are crooks." He waited. He walked her out. He did not say anything about Holst because Mr. Adebayo had been at the conservatory long enough to know that some things you do not say out loud where the walls might hear. At the curb he said only one sentence. "My daughter plays a little. She is 8. She asked me last Thursday, what makes someone a real musician? I told her, the person who keeps playing when nobody is listening." He waved her into the cab and went back to his floors. Mira did not go home. Home meant her mother, and her mother meant the phone call to her father, and the phone call to her father meant a man in a hospital bed in another country with a saline drip in one arm asking her how the recital was coming. Her father had paid for Holst the way other fathers pay for surgeries. He had not paid for it for her to bring back the bill. She went instead to the only place in the city where she had ever played for free, a small Methodist church 4 blocks from the conservatory run by a soft-voiced minister named Reverend Lynn, who let students practice on the upright in the basement common room in exchange for half an hour of music on Sunday morning. Mira had played there once a month for 2 years. The upright was nothing special. The action was sluggish in the bass. A middle B was slightly out of tune, in a way that had become, to her, a friend. She let herself in, with her own key. The common room was empty. The afternoon light came through the small high windows in long planks of gold. She sat at the upright with her coat still on and put her hands flat on the lid and breathed. She did not play. Not yet. She listened to her hands shake against the wood. Then she lifted the lid and played one chord, C major, voiced wide, the lowest C ringing under the right hand like a bell heard across water. She did not play it for Holst. She did not play it to prove anything. She played it because her hands had been told for 3 weeks that they were not good enough, and the wood under them had said only, play. The middle B was still out of tune. She loved it for being out of tune. She loved it the way you love the chipped edge of a cup your grandmother gave you. Reverend Lynn found her there an hour later, playing a slow Schubert impromptu she had not touched in 2 years, playing it without showing off, the right hand walking softly above a left hand that asked no permission of anyone. He stood at the door and did not speak. When she finished, he came in and sat down in the front row of folding chairs. "Mira," he said, "you played that one different today." "Did I?" "You played it for yourself." She closed the lid. "Reverend, I'm not going back." He did not ask which back. He waited. He said, "I would never play professionally, in front of everyone." She heard her own voice and was surprised to find it steady. And the thing is, I think the worst part is that for about an hour I believed him. I sat on the stairwell and I believed him. And now, I do not know what I believe. I know I do not want to be the person Holst was trying to make me be. I know that. And I know I do not want to never play again. I cannot live in either of those rooms. Reverend Lynn folded his hands. He was 60, gentle, and not a man who used many words. "There is a third room, Mira. There usually is. Would you do me a favor?" "What?" "This Saturday is our 140th anniversary service. I'd planned a children's choir and a guest soloist who has just dropped out. I have a piano nobody important plays and an audience of perhaps 80 people, mostly older, who would not know Holst from a hardware store. Would you play one piece?" "Any piece. Yours." She stared at him. "You don't have to," he said. "I am asking, not requiring. I just thought if Holst is going to be the last thing you played for, you might want a different last thing." She thought about that for a long time. Outside, a bus hissed at the corner. Inside, the radiator ticked the same patient tick as the conservatory stairwell. "One piece," she said. "I choose it." "You choose it." She walked the 4 blocks back to her dormitory and slept for 14 hours. She woke up at midnight and ate a whole loaf of bread with butter, the first real thing she had eaten in a week. She did not turn on her phone. There were 47 messages on it, 3 from her mother, 2 from the accompanist, 1 from Lucas, the others from a number she did not recognize, which she would later learn was Holst himself, calling not to apologize but to clarify which of her belongings would be cleared out of his studio. She did not call back. She slept again. On Thursday she went back to the church basement and began to choose. The piece she chose was not the concerto she had prepared for 3 years. Holst had occupied the concerto the way an army occupies a city. Even the cleanest pages of it now smelled like his polished voice. She could not give the church a piece that still had his fingerprints on it. She chose a Brahms intermezzo she had loved when she was 13, before any teacher had taught her how to be afraid of it. Op. 118, No. 2. Slow, in A major, with a middle section that lifts and then settles like a person being told a kindness late in life. Holst had once said the intermezzos were for old ladies and broken pianists. She had agreed at 13 and disagreed at 19, and only now understood why she had been wrong to agree. She practiced for 3 days, not 18 hours a day, not with a metronome on the table beside her dinner. She practiced 4 hours. She slept 8. She ate. She walked along the river and watched a child throw bread at the geese, and felt something inside her chest, which had been clenched for 3 years, slowly let go. On Saturday afternoon, she dressed in a plain dark dress and walked to the church. The room was warm. 83 people were there, by Mr. Adebayo's late account, because Mr. Adebayo came in a clean grey suit with his 8-year-old daughter in a blue cardigan beside him. Reverend Lynn had told him. There were old women in the pews with hymnals folded in their laps. There was a widower in the back with his hat on his knee. There was a young couple with a baby asleep against the father's shoulder. There were 2 men from the soup kitchen down the street who had wandered in for the warmth. None of them had heard of Maestro Holst. None of them had heard of her. She walked up the side aisle to the upright. She did not bow. The bowing belonged to the other life. She sat on the bench and looked at the keys at the middle B that was still slightly out of tune, at the worn place on middle C where her thumb had rested for 2 years of Sundays, and she lifted her hands. She did not begin the way Holst had taught her to begin. She did not strike a pose silence into the room. She simply played the first chord of the Brahms. The room did not know what was happening to it. It only knew, in the way rooms know, that a young woman at a basement piano was playing something it had not been promised and had not earned, and that the air over the wooden pews had changed temperature. The intermezzo opens with a phrase that asks a question and then answers it gently. Mira played the question. The room held its breath without knowing it was holding its breath. She played the answer, the small descending kindness, and the widower in the back lowered his hat slowly into his lap. She did not play it for Holst. She did not play it to prove him wrong. She played it for herself, for the long-dead Brahms, for the 8-year-old in a blue cardigan whose father had told her on Thursday that a real musician was the one who kept playing when nobody was listening. She played the middle section, the lift, the small storm that gathered and did not break, only resolved. Her left hand walked under her right the way a person walks beside another in grief. The middle B rang slightly out of tune, and she let it. It was the sound of a thing that had survived being used. When the piece returned to its opening, she played the question again, and this time her answer was a different answer than the first, because the room had changed and she had changed, and that is what the Brahms is for. She held the last chord until the sustain in the old upright failed by itself, and then she lifted her hands. The silence after a piano stops. In a basement, in a small church, with the radiator ticking and a baby still asleep against her father's shoulder, is a different silence than the silence Holst had taught her to manufacture. That silence had been a vacuum. This silence was a vessel. It held everyone in it and gave them back to themselves before it released them. The widower clapped first. Then the two men from the soup kitchen, then the old women, slowly, the way old women clap, because they have clapped at many things and know how much warmth a clap can carry if you mean it. The 8-year-old in the blue cardigan clapped with her whole arms. Her father did not clap. He looked at Mira with a steady old grateful gaze and nodded once, very small. Reverend Lynn stood beside the pulpit and did not move for a long moment. Then he said, in his soft voice, "Thank you, Mira." He did not say more. The service moved on. Afterward, in the basement room, the 8-year-old in the cardigan came up to her with a paper cup of juice. "Are you a real musician?" she asked, very seriously. Mira knelt down to her eye level. She thought about it. "I am becoming one," she said. "Today I started." The girl nodded as if this was a reasonable answer. She handed Mira the juice and went back to her father. Mira walked home through the late afternoon. She passed the conservatory. The studio windows were lit. Inside, Lucas was probably playing the Brahms, the other Brahms, the heroic one, the one Holst loved, and Holst was probably standing behind him saying, "That is the price, Lucas, that is the price." She did not stop at the conservatory. She did not need to. On Monday, she withdrew from Holst's studio. She did not write a long letter. She wrote 3 sentences. "Thank you for the technique. I am unable to continue under your instruction. I wish you well in the remainder of the program." She did not send a copy to her father. She called him instead that evening while he was awake in his hospital bed. She told him what had happened. She told him she was leaving Holst. She told him she was applying, in the spring, to a smaller school in a smaller city to study with a woman who taught the intermezzos. She braced for him to argue. He did not. He listened for a long time. Then he said, very softly, "Mira, I sent you to him because I thought he could make you. I did not understand, until just now, that he was trying to unmake you. You did right. You did right by yourself. And by me. I am sorry I did not see it sooner." She cried then, not the way she had cried on the stairwell, but the way a person cries when they have been carrying a heavy stone and have finally been told they may put it down. She graduated from the smaller school 3 years later. She did not become a Holst kind of pianist, a concerto soloist, a list of competitions won. She became a different kind. She gave recitals in the small halls of small towns. She taught children. She wrote a slow, honest book about how a young pianist survives a teacher who is trying to break her. Mr. Adebayo's daughter, who was by then 11, took lessons from her on Saturday mornings in the basement of Reverend Lynn's church, on the same upright with the same middle B, slightly out of tune. The girl became, in time, a very fine pianist, the kind her father had described when she was 8, the one who keeps playing when nobody is listening. Years later, in an interview at the back of a small magazine, Mira was asked the question all such interviews ask, "What made you the musician you are today?" She thought for a long time. She did not name Holst. She did not name the concerto. She did not name the recital that had been cancelled when she walked out, or the one in the small church that had taken its place. She said, "I had a janitor who told me on the worst afternoon of my life that a real musician is the one who keeps playing when nobody is listening. And I had a minister who said there was a third room, and I had a Brahms intermezzo that did not care who I was trying to impress. The rest is just time." The interviewer waited for more. She did not give more. She did not need to. A real musician, she had learned, is the one who chooses, on the worst afternoon of her life, the piano that will still know her name on the best. She kept playing. She is playing still.